Hello and welcome to Focus on the Bible. I am so glad that you are listening. I want to begin by inviting you to our services at Eastside. Meet at 9 o'clock for worship, followed by Bible classes for all ages at 9:30, and then at 10:30 for a second period of worship. In addition, we meet at 6 p.m. on Wednesday evenings for Bible study. Glad to have you come and visit with us soon. This morning, we're going to continue with part 2 of the lesson that my grandfather, William Andrews, preached on August 20th, 1989, called Why Am I Here? And now the conclusion.
And then Solomon said, I went from there to authority, and I became the greatest king that Israel ever had. The greatest king. I ruled in such a way that according to 1 Kings 9, he said, I ruled from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates of Arabia. He spread the kingdom of Israel greater than any kingdom before nor after him. He was such a tremendous power in the then known world that it says all the kings of the earth came to Solomon for advice. Can you imagine that all peoples of the then known world were people that were bowing before him and bringing him tribute and seeking out his counsel? Oh yes, he was a man of tremendous wealth. But this is what he said about it in the 4th chapter, and looking this time at verse 19. For that which befalleth the sons of man, read the wrong verse. Start in verse 13 of the 4th chapter. Better is the poor and the wise child than an old and foolish king, who will no longer be admonished. For out of the prison he cometh to reign, whereas also he that is born in his kingdom becometh poor. I considered all the living who walk under the sun with a second child that stand up in his stead. There's no end of all the people, even of all that have been before them. They also who shall come after them shall rejoice not in the king. For surely this also is a striving after the wind. Solomon said, I was a great king. But you know what happens? I grew old. And when I grew old, the people knew that I was going to die. And even though the successor was nothing but a little child, now he was older than that, Rehoboam was, but still, according to Solomon, aged king, he said he was but a child. And already as a child, the people are turning their affections from this old and aged king to that serve that little child. They're not going to remember me, said Solomon. All they that will come after me won't remember the works that I performed or the things which I built, the wealth that I accumulated. They won't remember then any of this. In fact, soon they will be asking, what happened to old King so-and-so? And that's certainly true. He said the coming generation won't even know me. So what then is good is power? What good is it to have been able to say, the kings of the earth bowed before me, but there are no kings that bow before me anymore? Is that the purpose of my life, to have people bow before me, seek out my counsel, pay me tribute? And now that I'm old, I serve no more purpose. They don't pay me any attention. It's not lasting. It's like grasping for the wind. And finally, looking at the 4th one is wealth. It may intrigue you to learn of Solomon's wealth. In the first place, it's incalculable. There was no way that you could calculate the wealth of that man. Over there in 2 Chronicles, it says in chapter 9, it says, and of all the kings of the earth, Solomon was the greatest in riches. You take all the kings of the earth, Solomon was the greatest. But you know, a statement like that doesn't mean anything. The 27th verse of that same chapter said this, "And so great was his wealth that he paved the streets of Jerusalem with silver." He treated it, it says, as stones. You and I would expect him to gravel the streets with rocks. No. Solomon said, gravel them or put them in there, pave them over, whatever you want to call it, with silver. It's interesting, the 13th verse of that chapter says, "And the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year," and remember, he ruled for 40 years, "that came to him in 1 year was 666 talents." Now, according to Smith's Bible Dictionary, and I couldn't believe this, and I had to check it 3 times, couldn't believe it, and gave it to my wife, and I said, "What do you read?" And she said, "I read the same as you." I wasn't aware that a talent of gold weighed 200 pounds. 200 pounds. No wonder that man in Matthew the 25th chapter had a problem when the Lord gave him 1 talent. I think if somebody gave me 200 pounds of gold, I might dig a hole and bury it. 200 pounds, and he got 666 of those a year. Now that comes out, of course, to 6 or 6.5 tons of gold. That's 1 year. It's incalculable to consider the wealth that that man possessed. But the question, of course, is, what was the answer? How did he feel? He said in the 5th chapter, "He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance shall be satisfied with increase. As he came forth from his mother's womb, naked shall he return to go as he came, and shall take nothing of his labor, while he may carry away in his hand, which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a great evil, that in all points as it came, so shall he go. And what profit hath he but to labor after the wind?" Now those are the 4 avenues, and those are the interesting things that Solomon discovered. That when you look at life and pursue all of those avenues that men might pursue, he said it's just like getting a handful of wind. It doesn't last at all. And it certainly does not give an answer. Now you know the answer before I read it, because you're familiar with the book of Ecclesiastes. The question is, what is the purpose? And he said it in chapter 12 in these words. And finally he said, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man." That's my duty. My responsibility to God is to give him glory. Jesus himself said, "Glorify me, Father, with the glory that I had with thee in the beginning." And the Father said, "I have glorified thee, and I glorify thee again." Why glory? Glory to himself, glory to his Son, because that's the pleasure of the Father. In Revelation 4:11, he said, "Thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure were they created, that they might give thee glory." I was a created being, so are you. And I was created to give God glory. And it's important, it's imperative that I do it. That is my whole life. And that's the way it should be done. Now, let me just review something with you that so many times that we forget. That it was this very reason, the like of giving God glory, that kept Moses out of the promised land. And if it would keep such a tremendous, faithful individual as Moses out of the promised land, it's bound to keep a person such as you and me out of the glories of heaven. That's why it's so important. And I want to review this with you. In Exodus, the 17th chapter, just recall it, you don't need to turn there, and verse 6 is where he first encountered near this little place called the Place of Palms, called Elim in the Scriptures, shortly after crossing the Red Sea, the fact that they had no water. And finally the Lord told him to go out and take his rod and strike the rock, and it bring forth water, and it did. And the people slaked their thirst. Later on, some years later, at Kadesh Barnea, before entering the land of Canaan, there was no water. And this time we are told in Numbers 20 that the Lord told him to go forth and speak to the rock. Instead of that, Moses took Aaron's rod and struck the rock. Now, a lot of people believe, and a lot of people tell you, that that was the reason why he was kept out of the land of Canaan, because he struck the rock instead of speaking to it. That's not what the Bible says. In Numbers, the 20th chapter, it gives the account, and here it is. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord, that is the one that Aaron had, and commanded him, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said unto them, Hear now, you rebels, must we fetch water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice, and water came forth. And the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron and said, Because you believe me not to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this congregation to the land which I have given them. Now, if you'll turn over just a little bit farther into the book of Deuteronomy, you'll find that Moses is talking to the Israelites just before he goes into Mount Nebo and dies, and is refreshing their memory of the 40 years that he led them through the wilderness. And in that, in chapter 4, we find this statement which he reviews with them. Furthermore, the Lord was angry with me for your sakes, and swore that I should not go over the Jordan, and that I should not go in unto that good land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. Over in the 106th Psalm, we find the psalmist years later saying this in verse 32 and 33. They also provoked God to wrath at the waters of Meribah. That was the waters of rebellion. So that it went hard with Moses on their account, because they were rebellious against his spirit, and Moses spoke rashly with his lips that he should not enter the land of Canaan, because he was angry. Instead of doing what God asked him to do, he was a man who lost his cool. He became angry and said to the Israelites, Because you rebels, you rebellious people, must we bring forth water from this rock? God said, in effect, Moses, you didn't bring any water at all from that rock. I did it, and you didn't give me the glory. You did not sanctify, set me apart in the eyes of my own people. And because you failed to give me the glory that's justly mine, you'll not enter the land of Canaan. That's how important it is. And that's why Solomon tried and strove with all of his might to find an answer. Lord, is it pleasure? No. Is it knowledge? No. Is it a power and authority? No. Is it wealth? No. I come to this conclusion, he says to you younger people, fear God and keep his commandments. That's the whole duty of man.
If you would like a copy of this lesson in its entirety, please contact me at focusonthebible@icloud.com. That's focusonthebible@icloud.com. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.